Here, let's.
Surprised it's not like a. Oh, I was about to say I'm surprised it's not a world's best dad.
This is what we're going to talk about today. Coolest dad in the
is.
galaxy. Well, I didn't mean to have it this way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's very themed, you know. I'll turn it back the way. I do find myself, I'm a right-handed mugger, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I hope everyone enjoyed the sound of that lip smack.
As we're both like starting off drinking our various beverages.
It's not so early either, but it is what it is.
You know me. I'm always drinking coffee till like 4 p.m. So
Same. Well, again, I think we should just dive in, right? You know, no need to banter. Everyone, welcome to Agent Talk with Seth and Dongwon. This is our weekly live stream with two agents. You know, I just see Dongwon laughing. It's like every time he makes
the smoothest intro we've had yet. That's all I'm gonna say. You know,
it's not smooth anymore.
Dropping right in. You know, great.
Well, listen, this is where we gather to talk about various aspects, you know, in the business from the agent perspective, in the hopes that we can provide some, you know, clarity and make the process a bit more transparent and available for new and aspiring agents. I've had a number of people actually reach out about jobs and stuff recently, and it is pretty fun to be able to just point over here to try and get you some, you know, information. Reminders. This isn't a series for writers unless you want to be an agent too or first. And the show is free, but if you are able, we'd love for you to kick some money into you know, people of color in publishing, and you know, you can see the little donation sign right there. I feel like I really threw myself off with that smile. I gotta like stop looking at your face when I'm in the midst of this thing.
I start like actively trolling you with my expressions as you go. Just be like,
it was really bad. It was really bad. By the way, before we start off anything, I just really want to say hi to all the regular viewers, both here and watching. You know, it seems like we have, you know, a decent number that come back, and we just really appreciate you guys being here and being participatory and you know, listening to what we have to say. Today we're going to be talking about author care. This is probably the episode so far that I least want my clients to be paying attention to. And that's why I'm hoping it's this far into. Maybe they won't see it. I don't know. It'll be fine. But first,
yeah, this is really. It's like, this is for agents. This isn't for writers. Like, you know, I don't think we're going to say anything that's like so awful that like writers would be horribly traumatized to hear it. But you know, this is going to be a little bit of our perspective of how do we as agents work with, you know, a stable of writers, right? It's not a one-to-one relationship. You know, I have dozens of clients, so do you, and there's a lot of relationships there to manage, and there's a lot of ways in which that we have built strategies over time to work with people and to, you know, sort of manage people's careers, which also involves a lot of times like managing how they're reacting to certain situations, managing their productivity and all that. And, you know, at the end of the day, writing work is incredibly personal work, right? It's incredibly intense work that is often very emotional, often very much about like one's personal history. Not always. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to write, but it does require a certain amount of sensitivity to that when you're talking about this topic, and just when you're working with writers or creative people generally. So,
yeah, I mean, I want to know how your week is, and we'll get there in a second. But it just makes you, you know, pause and just remember that even the slush pile things that you want to throw away in 2 seconds, like that person could have spent like 8 years on. So it's a really intense thing where, of course, we take on everything, and we take it on with our whole heart. But there are going to be plenty of opportunities whereby there's something, you know, we're never connecting on the same level, you know, that author is around their work, and we just have to be able to figure out how to do that. So before we start, what's up? How was the week? Let's couple minutes.
Yeah. Absolutely. Week's been good. Signed a new client at the beginning of the week. That's always an exciting moment. Haven't announced who that is.
How'd you find? What was an established? What's the dealio?
Established had some previously published books and was referred to me by a writer who I have a great deal of respect for that I don't work with personally. So I was quite flattered that she DM'd me and was like, "Hey, I have this person. Would you be interested in talking?"
Yeah.
Like, absolutely. And you know, it was a really loved the book, really loved the read. But I had this funny moment where, you know, the book's a very unusual book. It's one that doesn't easily fit into a category. There's a lot of questions I still have about like, how do we frame this? And I was talking to her, and the conversation was going really well. We had that very personal connection, which is one of the things I really look for in that sort of initial conversation. And I just straight up said to her, I was like, you know what? I'm really not exactly sure how to position this, how to pitch it. But you know what? That seems to be my specialty anyway, so let's just go for it. You know what I mean? And it made me sort of realize like how much I enjoy working on a project that's a little offbeat, that's a little unusual, and a real challenge to figure out like, how do we make this work, right? But that's the joy of it for me. I don't like doing things that are like very center of market, right over the transom kind of deals. I'd probably be more successful and more relaxed if that was what I liked doing. But
don't say stuff like that. Don't do that. Seriously.
What about you, man? What do you? What's your
lesson to all you people? Don't put yourself down like that. Come on.
I wasn't even putting myself down. It was just realizing
you were doing
that,
something.
I think
you were doing something.
Sometimes I look at the way other people do this business, and I have a lot of respect for it. It's so not how I do it. And yes, their lives are also stressful and difficult.
Feel free to go work at WME and wear a suit. Like that's your choice, right? It's not our choice.
You know what? I'm good.
Yeah, my week was okay. I mean, I feel like this is, so normally in August, like the industry's sort of dead. I would say that it's less dead this because everyone's sitting in front of the computer wherever they are, and not in the office. But it has felt a bit of a like I've been taking care of business, catching up on reading, a lot of contract work. We are starting to open the door to hiring again, which is what we had been intending to do out in LA in my office. But we actually have a space even in New York now. So we're looking to hire for a number of different things. And we're looking for kind of a different position than might be normal, which is kind of exciting. So the most exciting thing this week has been doing like lots of calls and research to see about finding a very particular type of agent. And it's been really fun. I've been learning a lot about a different side of the biz than I normally don't mess around with. And awesome. All in the context of hiring someone who will then do all that work for me. So it's it is exciting. So yeah, that's the week. And then we got this right here. Why don't you kick us off? Yeah.
It's always such like a nice way to like cap the week. It's like, Fridays we get to sit back and talk about the business for a minute, reflect a little bit. But yeah, author care. Shall we dive in?
Yeah. After you, my lord.
So, I mean, I guess that my core question is like, how do you approach this? How do you think about managing relations with authors? Is it, purely professional? Is it keeping someone at arm's length? Is it very, social? Is it like a personal friendship? Like, obviously I'm describing two very different ends of the spectrum there. But what are the factors that go into it for you? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think one thing that you have to remember, that people have to remember or continue to remind themselves, is that each writer is their own business. We talk about that a lot, right? But they're their own entity. They have their own needs. And I think an agent has their strategy and style, but that will also probably shift a lot, depend on the needs of the author. So I actually think this actually really begins on that decision about whether you're taking on someone, and you can get a big sense of what they need based off of those initial conversations. And the reason why I bring this up is because some of my clients that I signed early are people that I might not have signed later, but might be sort of adjusted the way I would have, interacted with them, because I didn't know sort of how best to interact with different people. So I have some people that really don't need much author care. They disappear, they come back, and other people that need text messages and, at all hours of the day. So it really is a little bit different. And so what I would just say, the vague answer to that question for me is, first I need to diagnose the situation and figure out what a person needs. And the thing is that, like we were mentioning earlier, I think different agents do different things. And I'm something that is, I'm willing to be pretty flexible and open. I have a colleague of mine who's sets huge boundaries, like no after hour calls unless it's super emergency, no weekend, no whatever. And I prefer that, but don't do that. So what about you?
Yeah. I mean, pretty much the same. It really depends on the client, depends on the situation, depends on what somebody needs, and sort of also where I'm at too, right? There are times where I'm super peak busy and I won't be able to respond to 15 texts in a day, right? So I think finding that balance between my preferred communication style and the client's preferred communication style is one of the things I'm trying to figure out very early on in that relationship. It's like, are you a texter? Are you an emailer? Are you a phone call person? Right? The answer is usually a mix of each of those, depending on the scenario. When I had Amal on, we kind of talked about this a little bit on camera between the two of us. But I think with each person, it really is finding a different level and different style and figuring out what that ideal way is. And especially when you're taking on someone who was previously represented by other people, or like different modes of communication that they're used to or they're looking for.
So
It
the good
also
news,
really highlights.
yeah, I was just gonna
What's
say the
that?
good news about that though is that usually they're leaving someone for a reason, and
Yeah.
they're like thankful that you're even talking to them. Communication really is the thing, right? Yeah,
Yeah, and the thing that I most often hear from writers who are unhappy is not feeling that connection, right? Not feeling
right.
like they can go to their agent and ask a question, or not feeling like they're in the loop about what's happening, right? And that's something I really try to keep front and center in my mind when I'm working with my clients. It's hard sometimes, right? It's hard sometimes to be
Yeah.
like, oh, right, I haven't talked to this person in a couple months. I should check in with them.
How do you
Do you have
do
any
that? How
specific?
do you? Yeah, you were asking that question. You're asking me the question I'm asking you right now.
Yeah, yeah. I have a big cork board over here. In other streams, you might have seen it, depending on the angle of my camera. That sort of lists all my clients and every active project that they have. I don't look at it enough. I should be looking at it, multiple times a day. I usually look at it a couple times a week and just as an overview. And what I try to be like is like, oh right, I haven't talked to that person in a minute. I should check in on where they're at on that project. But it really depends on the person. I have clients who they're off doing their thing, and whenever something crops up, they'll come back to me.
Yeah.
But they're not people who sort of need that regular forceful check-in. And then there's other people who, have felt very out of the loop, even though I felt like I was talking to them. So, we set up regular check-ins, right? So I have a
Mhm.
few clients that we have every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, something like that. We'll just hop on a video call, hop on the phone, and just be like, "Hey, what's going on? What's cooking? Like, what do we need to address?" And that's really helped people who do need to feel a little bit more of that connection, but aren't people that I'm texting with naturally about whatever's going on. So
Well, what's interesting is that first of all, I love the corkboard idea. Um, what's interesting is that authors don't always realize how much work we do or don't do for them. And I don't mean that negatively, the don't do. Again, the people that disappear and they come back, like sometimes you just don't, there's just not much going on. And you gear up when a book is pubbing, or you gear up when it's contracts, or again, it's not about neglect. It's about, at a moment when they're writing a book and they're gone somewhere and there's not
yeah.
much to do. And you just keep them in mind for projects or for interviews or this and that. And then there are other ones where I find myself in conversation about them that they don't know a lot. And I sometimes want to just it's important just to remind them, or let them know rather, about, even though they don't need to know, just that they're being brought up, just so that they know. For instance, foreign rights. Like, I have a regular check-in with my foreign rights team about things that are going on right now, and I have a
Mm-hmm.
big check-in about things in the next 3 months, and a bigger one, for the next
Mm-hmm.
6 months. And then we do like office style, like we do launches about our books, and basically there's a lot of different things that I'm bringing up people for in Hollywood. I'm talking about them when I'm speaking, whatever. And so one of the things that's also, I find important and that I got to do better as well is just remember to be proactive sometimes in those little check-ins, just to be able to like provide a bright, happy light, because we are doing work. And I think that's the thing that's really important. Basically, what I'm saying here that's most important here is an author can't read your mind. And you need to make sure that you're connecting with them in order so that you can share the pros and the cons of what's going on. And so what I do is I need to do this more as well, but I have a theoretical weekly call, which is definitely not a weekly call, but it's probably an every other weekly call in
Mm-hmm.
some way, shape, or form with my assistant, where we just go over my list. And really what that tends to be is me saying the person's name and then just like talking about anything that's going on with that person. The
Yeah.
assistant takes notes, and then sometimes I'll be like, okay, I got to check in on this thing. Oh, remind me, I got to do this. Oh, da, da, da. And then at the end of it, I get an email with like a large like to-do sheet of
Yeah.
things. And that tends to be like the way I deal with that. But what that covers is really the clients that are not the active clients that I have to do, that I got to, make sure that I'm keeping the finger on the pulse. The clients that have things going on, it's happening all the
That's
time.
the tricky thing. Is like, when something's cooking, right? When you're in the middle of a deal negotiation, when you got a contract or a film deal happening, it's very easy to keep that person front and center. And then you lose focus on everybody else, right?
Right.
And that's the thing. At any point in our careers or our daily lives, ideally something's popping off, right?
Yeah.
And that may be popping off for 2 to 3 people over here, but then you have 2 to 3 people over here who are feeling like, hey, where'd my agent go, right? And the thing that I struggle with the most, and to be very transparent on that, I handled this so badly recently that I lost a client over it, actually.
Oh man.
And what happens sometimes is once you do that book deal, it moves off of my priority list, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, because once we did the edits, we pitched it, we sold it, negotiated the contract, got the money in. For me, you move off my to-do list at that point, right? And so that can be a really jarring moment for a writer who's been getting really constant attention and contact.
That's right.
When, for me, I've handed the project off to the editor's reading, doing their edits now. We've handled all the contractual issues. It's off to my sub-rights teams. All that has happened. And there's nothing active for me at that point to do in terms of that management. And so I think that drop in terms of the communication and the connectedness and the activity can feel really jarring to a client.
And what do you think is your solution to that? I mean, I have some thoughts, but I'm just curious, like, what do you think that you can do better than if that's an issue?
Yeah. I mean, the challenge is they're no less important to me as a person or as a client or any of that. It's just there's nothing to do right now, right? There's no active issues. So I think for me, calling that out more explicitly is something I'm going to start doing. Being like, hey, we did this thing. Here's where we're at. Here's what's about to happen. You're going to hear from me less for a minute. If you need something, I am always here to talk. I'm always here to answer your questions. But for a moment, there's really not going to be as much going once this is handed off to the editor and it's moving, right?
Right.
And then, reminding them to check in with me if they're feeling like there's something I'm dropping the ball on or I'm not paying enough attention to. So I think making it really explicit as like a piece of thing that I talk about with my clients will hopefully help with that. And then, for me, the corkboard I was talking about used to be structured very differently. It used to be structured very much about like tasks, like what are my open projects, like what's in contract negotiation, what's getting ready to go out. And so it wasn't tracking every single client. It was only tracking active stuff. And I think that's where I started to lose focus a little bit on people who weren't super active and forget to check in with them and be like, hey, what's going on, right?
Yeah.
That said, it's always going to be a dance. Someone's always going to feel a little bit on the outs. Someone's going to feel a little bit like they're not getting the attention that they think that they need. And figuring out how to balance that is such the challenge of our jobs on this front, at least. And proper author care is, I think, really important, and it's something I pride myself on. So it's tough when you feel like that's not going as well as you want it to go. Yeah.
Well, it's funny because proper author care does mean like in the moment, and then generalized taken care of, and really I think the key is that communication. But some people want more, and we have to also recognize that sometimes like we're not providing what that person wants, and that's never going to change. But I agree, it is about. Like it tends to be like, okay, I'm sending out a book. Let me tell you what the submission process is like, because you might not hear from me for 2 or 3 weeks, and then same thing, sell the book. Okay, here's what's going to happen. It's going to take you 3 months before you're going to get a paycheck. This is going to happen. This is going to happen. This is going to happen. You can start writing. But the thing, I know when I'm failing, when an author checks in and asks a question in like a tentative way. And I'm like, whoa. I want you to feel like you never have to be like, is it okay if I read something or none of that stuff. And I think that happens. That happens a decent amount. Especially for, this is kind of funny, but like the web comics that I rep, who are like self-made people who are very successful businessmen and women, doing their own thing. Then they join here and they like don't know that they can communicate or whatever, or they do deals like on their own and then they like pass it on. They're like, does this work? And you're like, I don't want to get you in trouble, but help me, let me do your job, And so sometimes, again, that's about who you're dealing with. But a lot of times, basically what that really is just not not knowing the potentials of the job of what an agent is. And I feel like that's what it really comes down to is like they don't know what they can get out of you. And,
Right.
obviously it's if we could just earn a commission check and do nothing, then that's the easiest way for us. But that's not like why we're here. We're here to
I mean,
make
I will say there's
everything
plenty
grow.
of agents who operate that way and
Yeah.
seem to do just fine, right? Like
Yeah.
who are there to collect that commission check, are there just to be that business support, and
Yeah.
no shade to that model, right? It's
Shade.
not some writers. Some writers want that. You said shade.
Shade. I want you to name
Yeah.
names.
Some it tends to be a little bit more of an old guard thing, right? Like it tends to be an older generation. I think it was just a slightly different model of how we worked with clients, and I don't know whether that's because the publishing market has changed. And there's a lot more pressure on us to really maintain those relationships in a way that, like, a generation or two ago, they didn't really have to, right?
Do you feel like that's okay? I mean, I feel like that there is this thing that happened. I think that what happened a little bit more in my mind, the old guard style was like, if you're big, I'm all over you. If you're small, I don't care. I think that might have been a little bit of it, which is awful. But
that's also true. That's also
yeah,
true. And obviously there are agent author partnerships that are like very strong personal friendships that was true in every era of publishing. I think and maybe it's a social media thing. Like I think our reputations are just so much more visible than for so many of the previous older agents, right? Who just weren't in this. Sometimes it feels like being in a fishbowl, right? Like everyone's kind of watching us. Everyone knows who we are. Everyone, and in part that's on us. That's on us for doing stuff like this and really like putting ourselves out there, being on Twitter, all that stuff. But I think our reputations are so much more visible and talked about in a way that they weren't necessarily before, other than big agent, not a big agent, right? Now it's how we interact with, how we talk to people, how we manage those relationships are, my impression is, being talked about quite a bit in back channels. And I think that's all for the good. I encourage that, actually, that writers talk about how they work with their agents, because other writers who are coming up need to know that in terms of trying to figure out what agent is right for them, right?
What's interesting is that I agree with you. And, there are plenty of times like I can feel confident that like I'm doing something okay because clients of mine recommend other people to me, and that's great. They say nice things. I feel pretty confident about recommending, my clients new potential clients speak to my clients. But I also know there's got to be some of this back channel stuff. I would love not to sneak in on it, but rather, I guess I would love to, maybe that's something I should consider, but I'm quite nervous thinking about it, having a summit or whatever, like just a check-in that's basically more to the lines of, all right, you know what? I haven't really done this. What am I missing? Like, what am I really missing? Now, mind you, when I've had an issue with a client, like, you speak more overtly to that, but it's almost like having couples therapy when everything's fine. It's probably more effective in the long run. And and maybe I should think a little bit more to that end. Boy, we're going all over.
I mean, I'm always really curious about what people are saying about me, right? And then, I want to know what I'm not doing well at. I want to know what people think in terms of me, that why I'm not the right agent for that person, or what my rep is that aren't the positive things, right? Like, and the thing is, the reality situation is, you do this long enough, you know enough people, you reject enough people, you have enough book deals go sideways, someone's got to have an opinion, right? And that's just the nature of the business. I would love to know what those things are. This is, in part like my upbringing coming out here, but like I always want to know what's that negative feedback, right? Because that tells me where I can improve. What do I need to work on? Or maybe it's like, oh yeah, that's true. That's me. I'm bad at that thing in terms of how I communicate with people. I'm never going to be the most organized person you've ever encountered, right? My brain doesn't work that way. So, if you're someone who really needs that super detailed organization, then, that I'm not the right agent for you, right? There's always going to be an extent that I need my clients to be a little bit of a self-starter on that level, and then come to me, right?
Has something, well, you sort of are answering my question now, but that was a self thing. Has anything popped up for you that like a client said that you were like, oh, like something that happened to me that I didn't really recognize, but now I recognize? I still do it probably a lot, but I don't I'm much more cognizant of, is I was I remember this clearly. I was at San Diego Comic-Con last year when it existed, and was out with an editor and a couple of my clients, and one of them mentioned that like they got an email from me that was more than a line long, and they were like, so it was a really good, it was a really good, really big deal. And then the other one joked along the same lines, and I was like, oh my gosh. And but what's going on there, and what's interesting is that I know exactly what's going on, is that I prioritize, I mean, if I break it down, I prioritize timeliness over length and like really long, thoughtful responses. And that's good and bad. There's tons of pros and cons there. So none of my clients should ever say, I don't get back to them right away. I get back to my clients way quicker than most people that I know. And I think that that's a pro of mine, but I definitely respond with the shortest, simplest thing.
Yeah.
And the idea that my clients are joking about that with behind my back made me be like, okay, I guess I should say, hi, blank, whatever. Yeah. But that's sort of not how I want them to hear. I want them to hear from me. And otherwise, if I have a long, thoughtful thing, I don't have time for that a lot of times in my head. So, yeah.
I mean, it's the problem. I do this all the time where I'm like, I got to reply to that a little bit more depth. I want to think about that a little more carefully. And therefore, it just falls off, right?
It falls off.
6 weeks later, I'm like, oh, shit, I never replied to that thing, right?
Yeah.
And so sometimes, it is easy to privilege like the quick, one of my clients, like similar thing. One of my clients was laughing at me because like I sent him, the book deal, the offer that came in, and I just said FYI, right? I didn't say anything else. And then I was like, oh yeah, that was a little weird. I should probably have written something a little more elaborate. I mean, I also called him and talked to him about it. Like, I don't think he felt neglected at the end of the day. But he still razzes me about it sometimes. And it's funny because coming up, you and I think, we would look at the communications that our bosses would send. And I remember having this reaction. I'm like, why are they like this, right? Why is this such like a chaotic response to sending a client something? And one of the partners of the firm was sort of famous for sending in every submission with "herewith as attached." That was the only cover letter that person ever sent, and I always thought that was so funny to me. But now I see myself turning into that person. I see myself like evolving into the person who does write that one line thing that sometimes I'm like, I probably should have explained a little bit more what my thinking was there rather than just like, and because it can be really brusque, it can be really curt or feels dismissive or doesn't feel like, I have the time to engage with it and really talk to it. And frankly, sometimes I don't, right? A lot of times I'm doing that because I'm on my phone, I'm running to a meeting or I'm traveling or something like that. And
the phone is the key. That's the problem. That's the real issue, is that we're on a phone, we see it, and you want to get back to them, but you're not going to write long on a phone. Totally. And that's the issue.
Yeah. Which is why, frankly, I'm turning into a phone call person, right? Mm-hmm. So often, it's so much easier for me just to call someone and have a 5-minute conversation that it would take me half an hour to write that email, right?
Yeah. But calls take a while too. They take your energy. They I feel like with an email, I'm not trying to argue the other way. I'm just thinking out loud. It's like totally. When I have a day of calls, then I'm so much more exhausted and get so much less done than when I'm typing, have to get distracted typing or whatever. But you're absolutely right. I mean, I don't know. It's just if I'm at the computer versus away, I guess. I don't know.
That's why the answer for me so much is I have a Slack channel for all my clients, right? Not everyone uses it. Only about probably half to 2/3 of my clients are in there in any active way. And a few of them don't use the public channels at all, only talk to me there. But the chat format or text even is such like a good halfway point because it's asymmetrical. I don't have to reply right away like email, but I can be really brief and like I can put half a thought in, go away for an hour to do a call, come back and finish my thought, right?
That's really interesting.
So chat has been such a nice hybrid between the phone call and the email for me in terms of maintaining, and also like chat feels more intimate, right? So they feel like they have access to me in a way that's a little bit more, it's just lower friction, right? It's so much easier for someone to pop in and be like, hey, blah, 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 blah. Here's like whatever my random thought is, right? And, sometimes
so do you have
a fragment of a pitch or
you have a private thing then for everyone, and then you have a public for also. You also have your clients, like if they want, hang out with each other?
Yeah.
Cool.
So I have all my clients in there. It's mostly a DM thing. Mostly I DM with my clients there, and that's sort
Yeah.
of where we talk.
Yeah.
But there are, I think, probably like 24 public channels now that some of them are like just people sharing pet photos, and like people talking about cooking recipes, and like the cooking channel is probably one of the most active. Or we'll just like talk about a dumb movie together, right? Like,
Interesting.
and those can be really fun and really engaging. That said, it's also been a big challenge because that becomes a community that I need to manage, right? And
Yeah.
making sure that's a safe space, making sure that people aren't abusing that or harassing each other, or like
Yeah.
it has added this layer of management and work for me that has occasionally become a really big challenge for me in a way that doesn't feel like part of my job description. At the same time, that it's also been a super useful business tool. So
Yeah.
I'm always thinking about how to implement that, how to revise that, and how to evolve that forward. Which is a weird challenge I've made for myself, right?
I'm
I think
interested.
a
I'm
few other
totally
people have
interested.
heard me
Yeah.
talk about it, start doing it, but
Yeah.
for me, that's just a weird thing that I started. But you were saying,
Well, I do
sorry.
Slack. No, no, no. I mean, I do Slack for certain projects,
Mm-hmm.
but not the thing as a whole. And I mean, I do think that's interesting. And also, like, there's so much collaboration potential there and stuff. It's definitely
Mm-hmm.
interesting. Um,
Yeah.
well, listen, we're 30 minutes in. We haven't like looked at point specifically to any of our topics, even though we've touched on all of them. So let's narrow it down to at least some of the things that we did want to do.
Let's
So
talk about
like
bad news.
that's yeah, that would be fun. How do you break bad news? Well, I usually just write FYI in an email, and
Mm-hmm.
then that's it. No, bad news is tough, and there's a lot of different forms of bad news.
Yeah.
So I would say that first of all, there's a whole subgenre of agent non-communication about bad news if it's not necessary.
Yeah.
But usually, most of the time, I get the permission from the author to do that. Example: submissions. You submit a
Yeah.
book, you're going to get lots of rejections. I almost always ask, and if I don't, it's because I forgot that one time. My clients, hey, I'm submitting it. Do you want to hear the rejections right now
Mm-hmm.
or later? And most of the time, they
Do you
don't
want
want
to
to
see the
hear it.
detail? Do you want to see the
Exactly.
feedback? Like, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You could be say someone that can off pass, or you could say, here's the letter. What tends to be what I recommend and what usually happens, because again, I could sell something for lots of money at auction and still have lots of passes. I don't see
Of
the
course.
need to just like hit you with some negative, off the back. Is really to wait until
I
there's
mean,
we're
you're sending
further
it
down the
out
line.
to 12 to 15 people. If three
Exactly.
people say yes, you're golden, right? Like
Yeah.
you're looking for 1 to 5 yeses, which
Exactly.
means most of what we hear is no, right? Like
Exactly.
most people are going to pass on your book, which is the process. And I think
Right.
it's hard for people to understand that sometimes when it's their first time out, or even
Yeah.
their 10th time out.
And also the thing is that we can do a number of things. We can also parse rejections in ways that they can't,
Yeah.
because rejections come in a lot of different forms. So if I just pass on all the rejections, then I'm passing on ones that say one thing but actually mean I didn't like the book.
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah.
what I really want to do is wait to the end, if we have to, gather up the different sets of opinions, figure out what they mean, and then present them in a way that says, it seems like this group feels like this group feels like this, whatever. And that's, to me, in other words, what we're doing there is it's not exactly screening, but it's using our expertise to understand or to parse what the editors are really saying, because we write rejections as well that we don't mean, because we want to be nice. Or sometimes, like, basically, my meanest rejections are the ones on things that I like a little bit. The ones I like a lot are my nicest rejections, and then or maybe the ones I don't like at all, I guess. I don't know, one of those two. But the ones in the middle are the toughest, because I'm like, I want to love it, but this and this and this, and because you got to be honest, right?
Exactly.
And you have to do that for your
the only time I really sort of care about the rejections and like we have a real conversation about the content of the feedback is when I'm hearing the same thing from everybody. When like 5 people are like, hey, this part of the book is really bothering me, or this part just doesn't land for me. That's when it'll be a real conversation. And, oftentimes that's us being like, okay, do we want to edit this and give it another shot, right? Do we want to take a beat before going on a second round? Or even sometimes going back to the same people who rejected it and be like, hey, you said this, we went back, we rewrote it, coming back to you with this new version, what do you think, right? Sometimes that's an explicit, what we call an R&R, a revise and resubmit. And sometimes those are just we revised it. Do you want to look at it again? If someone was on the bubble. So that's when like rejections really become useful. But yeah, for me, it really is about checking with the client about how much of that do they want to see. And some people are like, yes, give me all of it, right? Like tell me every single negative thing, because then I can take that back and learn from it. And some people are like, don't even tell me about rejections. I don't want to hear anything from you until it's yes. You know what I mean? Or until we're done. And that to me, those are the two extremes. And most people fall somewhere in the middle of like, yeah, tell me if somebody passes, but unless you think it's a really useful thing to read, then don't pass it on. And so often what I'll do is tell them so and so passed, and then take out the thing that they said that's really nice, because almost always you get a little piece of like, I loved this part of it. This part of it really resonated with me, and so I'll pass on those little encouraging tidbits even as they're passing, because you get those a lot. Right. Provided they're genuine, right? If it's just like, I really liked this, but it's not for us, then it's like, whatever. Right. If there's a specific thing, it's often nice to pass that along. So, you're always trying to find ways to manage, to soften that blow of the bad news a little bit, and to put context around it, and reminding people like, hey, most people are going to pass on this. It's no big deal. We're still golden. We got 2 more weeks on this submission. It's great someone looked at it fast, even if they pass. Just like framing it for them in a way that they can understand my thought process, right? Never lie to them. I'm never misleading them. I'm never giving them false hopes. But I think that's well,
how
I manage that.
And I agree completely. And one thing I think that this gets to is basically we're a buffer with our own emotions and connections to the project as well. Like when people pass on a project, I do not like it. And that makes sense. Even those little whatever ones, I want to argue with them. Sometimes they say something I'm like, that's totally absurd. Are you just passing, or are you just saying that? You know what I mean? Like, and sometimes a rejection is such of a level that I like won't send back to that person. Like it's a very personal thing.
Yeah.
And I don't. And
I've had some passes where I'm like, wow, we're never working together.
Yeah, exactly. Like, exactly. And once like a colleague of mine was got a pass that was basically like, how dare you send a book like this to me, which is clearly a ripoff of one of my people. And I was like, what? That's crazy.
That's nothing.
Yeah, it was. It's crazy.
Anything worse.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So, but that's just submissions, right? There's a lot. The other ones, the real hard ones are let's just name a few of the bad news potentials. One, your book is not doing well. Your book is not going to do well before it even comes out. How does it lining up? It doesn't look good. There's
poor initial orders. Your publisher is falling apart.
No publicity. Nothing's working. Yeah. And but before we go into them, let's just name a few of them so we can make sure we don't miss any of them. And then there's obviously there's the poor reception. I even have, for people who think that they're like deserve awards, people get upset if they don't get awards, and that might be something that people listening to this are like, that's crazy. But the truth of the matter is, some people rightly believe that they have a chance at awards, and some people don't. And you as an agent have to deal with that a little bit.
Have a book out and the awards list comes out in that category. It's always a bummer not to see your name there. It's hard not to hope for that on some level, even if you know you're not like an award style writer, right?
Especially in the sci-fi fantasy world where it's so transparent. You can see where you missed it. You can see lots of different things. People are nominating each other and pushing each other. It's really rough in that space. And then also you can see bad books like get nominated, and you're feeling bad about that.
He said, I thought you were about to name somebody, and I was like, what are we doing?
We're gonna get real. And then there's also the not gonna pick up, not sold, not picked up for option, not something, a creative project that you create not working. And I think those are the main. There are others out there.
Sales hates the cover. Right, that's a common one. Right?
That's true. That's true.
Barnes & Noble hates the cover, right? That's always a tricky conversation.
You hate the cover.
I don't like the title, right? Editorial is a big one, right? Like how are we managing the editorial relationship? Sometimes I'll get a note from an editor being like, "Hey, this is a problem," right? So sometimes if it's a sensitive issue, they'll reach out to me first. We'll have a conversation about it, and then it's kind of up to me to break it to the writer. And sort of prep them for that editorial conversation. I mean, like, we're going to talk about this issue in the book, or they really want these changes. and just a heads up that that conversation is coming down the pipeline.
Yeah.
Bad reviews, right? That's a big one.
It's a big one.
You know, stuff like that. So, you know, we're passing on bad news at least as often as we're passing on good news, if not more, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's rough out there, right? Most books don't succeed.
Right.
It's the reality of the marketplace. Most books are published and disappear within the year, right?
And you know, there are books that get all the things and do not succeed. And that
absolutely.
is that's very common. So it's like, even still, you know, I have a book that published this last week, and positive New York Times review, a modern love piece connected to it today. And I just know it's not working. And I don't have to talk to the author yet about that, but I know that's going to come. That's the thing that we know a lot of times by seeing the tea leaves. And it's sort of like, you know, what is the positive? How do you approach? I think it's what we're talking about here. What I like to talk about is the overall plan, right? And how things fit. Yep. And so if a book isn't working, what I like to talk about is the ability to preserve that author's career. Sometimes that means we're going somewhere else, but like, listen, you get good reviews, then hey, you're giving me the opportunity to sell the book again, right? Yep. You know, like, it's like, how can I phrase it in a way that's honest?
That's the thing I always focus on.
Exactly. Honest, but like, where does it build? Where does it build? Yep. Where do we build?
Oh, that's funny. I had a situation that happened last year where, you know, I felt like a book publication was going a bit off the rails. And so I kept focusing on like, hey, but we got this thing in the can, right? This other thing's happening. And at some point that author was finally like, yeah, but what about this one, right? Like you want that book, but what about this book? And I was like, oh, right. Yeah. I was trying to focus on the positive so much that I forgot that we still need to talk about the thing that isn't going well, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, it's tough. You know, I recently had an entire imprint dissolve underneath one of my projects, right? Imprint just doesn't exist anymore. And it's like, great, what do we do?
What imprint is this?
You know? Pulse.
Okay. Yeah.
And thankfully it was just, we were in an option period, but it's still figuring out, okay, what's next, right? What are we doing with this? And it's tough when you have that thing where you feel like you're making progress and then you have that kind of setback.
Editors leaving is another big one. Speaking of, happens all the time.
I had an editor leave 2 weeks after he bought the book, and I was like, great, thanks.
Former colleague of mine. Yeah, whatever. I don't know. We'll stop.
You know, so I think for me, it's finding ways to be really honest and really clear, right? Here's what's happening. Here's why this sucks. I hear you. I understand all of that. Also, here's what we can do about it. Always try to have a plan, or at least the shape of one, or be like, hey, I'm thinking about this thing. I'm not sure what to do about this yet. Here's some initial thoughts I have, you know what I mean? And I find being really transparent of like, I don't know what to do yet. I'm figuring that out, right? And then that I think is really reassuring for people to hear. And then, you know, the bigger strategic plan of like, okay, here's what this means for your career overall, right? So this thing didn't work. We got this option, this option, this option. Remember the plan that we talked about 3 years ago. We're still on track for that, or let's adjust that so we have a way to go, right? So I think really trying to keep people focused on the long term. You know, the irony is a lot of us are fundamentally optimists, right? Otherwise, it's very hard.
Why are we doing this? Yes.
So I think focusing on reasons to be optimistic for me is a lot of the way I manage breaking that news.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's all true, and I think that it's okay to acknowledge that things suck sometimes, right? And like going back to the editor thing, like there's an editor thing does not mean something is not good going to happen, but most of the time it's basically saying, hey, you're not going to have as good as a publication now. It just happened. And it's always treated, the reason why I get so pissed off at the editor thing is that it's always treated cavalierly by the publisher. And it's just so like, you know, one of the problems is that we sell books through an editor to a publisher. And the disconnect there is so strong that we have to spend so much of our time, our relationships, basically dealing with those two different entities. One is the buddy editor, and the other is figuring out the editor's relationship within the house. Is the editor a yes a yes person? Is it, and therefore like says one thing to you, but like won't take risks in the house. And what happens basically when an editor leaves, and if the book is like abandoned and dead, then one, great, that editor is like does have, great sway or whatever, but it also shows a major problem at the house, in my opinion. Like, what are we doing there? And so,
and the thing is, we're learning every time too, right? We're
exactly.
learning about what it's like to work with this editor, what it's like to work with this house, with this sales director, whatever it is, and that changes constantly. So, like, it's constantly a learning process for us. And kind of sort of tangential to this, but related, like, I actually wrote a whole newsletter about this. One occupational hazard we have is we see these things over and over and over again, right? So one of my clients once analogized this to, like, we're a professional chef, right? And we get cuts, we get burns, we have all these issues that chefs have all the time. And we're talking to a home cook who's like, I fucking burned my hand on my pan, right?
Yeah.
And for me, I'm like, oh yeah, I did that 3 times last week. For them, it's like, this really sucks. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And I think
Yeah.
managing that conversation and remembering, like, oh, right, they have one book. They see this issue 1 time, 2 times, 3 times in their career. I see it 10 times in a year, right?
Yeah.
And so remembering how to like put myself in my client's shoes in that way, and remember that, like, hey, this thing that you're seeing out there, yeah, it does suck. In the grand scheme of things, it's not a big deal, but it doesn't mean, in keeping them from feeling dismissed while trying to explain that, I think is a big part of the challenge. Right?
Totally. Well, one of the other challenges is that sometimes it is a big deal. Sometimes the truth of the matter is that they are in real trouble for that. If they to write whatever they want to write, like that might not happen again unless they change their name or have a real shakeup, or and like the real best path is to go do YA or something like that. And that's really, really hard. And I think that
also
one of the
bad news in this
saddest
business can be so slow moving that it's like, oh, we got to sit with this bad news for the next year.
Yeah.
And like
Yeah.
keep trying to move forward, even though we know it's not working.
That's a good point.
That can be a really tough situation.
Well, and here we're talking about agents, so let's be really honest here for a second. A client's bad news is, we take it on, but we take it on in such a smaller way because most of the time that client could not sell another book and we will be fine because that's our job, right? Our job is to represent other people and move forward. So it does suck and we do stick with that client and we do our very best. But most of the time, literally, if that client stops doing other books and we want them to, and we work with them and whatever, or they leave you, like, your career should be fine. Yeah. And that's the part of the business. And that's really hard because that's the part of the disconnect that also exists there is like, unless that person is your once a year 7-figure thing that like does something really bad and you should drop that person. Well, I don't even know, whatever. Unless for some reason, whatever, like you're sort of fine. And I'm not trying to dismiss the thing. I'm just trying to talk about the difference between your work and their work.
Exactly. It's very one hard. Issue in my week. It's not for them. It's career defining. For me, it's a speed bump, right? And that's not me being callous or dismissive once again, but it is the reality of the situation where I just know that also I'm dealing with 4 other people who are having problems that week too, right? This is one of a list of issues I'm dealing with. Oftentimes it's the most important. Oftentimes it's the biggest one, but it's still, I got other shit to do. And, the most jarring is I've had situations where I've called somebody and been like, hey, you got an amazing book deal. We're so excited. This great thing's happening. And then hung up that phone and picked up the phone and called someone else and said, this bad thing's happening. It's a fucking disaster. I'm so sorry. Right. Yeah. Like, and that's the pivot we're making sometimes, is going straight out of the best news and straight into the worst news. Right. But that's sort of the reality of what we do. And I think as an agent, you need to find a way to compartmentalize. Like, I have almost 30 clients. That's 30 compartments in my head that I'm trying to keep separate. It can be really tough sometimes. It can be really tough not to let that mood bleed over from one conversation to another, or to not actively chase the good news, because we don't like bad news either. And breaking bad news sucks. There have been times where I've had a really hard time gearing myself up to tell a client, yeah, this thing sucks, right? Or yeah, this has gone badly, or, breaking that bad news. I think it's really important to do so. I can't claim that I've done it perfectly every time in terms of doing it in a timely fashion, or a clear fashion, or because sometimes you're like, if I wait 2 weeks, maybe this other piece of good news will come through, and then we can like soften that a
That's a
little bit.
huge point.
Or
Thank you for saying that. That's a real point. The wait and see thing, because that's again us
yeah,
choosing, but sometimes that's our fear, and sometimes that's the right move. Like
yeah,
sometimes it's exactly like the submission. Like, why am I telling you this bad news here when we're nowhere
yeah,
near? This is a normal part of the
yeah,
process. And other times there's like maneuvers or things that we could do here, or like we're I'm sending out short stories, and we're getting passed from 3 places, but I'm just gonna wait until I hear from this fourth place
yeah.
because maybe that will be a yes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and but the other big thing is pushing it down and away, and not
Mm-hmm.
bringing it up to the client. That's another thing you got to really work hard on sometimes, because like especially on submissions that aren't working, you still got they're clients trust you, they're waiting, right? So when it hits the 6 week mark and you're wondering what you should do when there's like 3 places left, and you could just sit on them, you still got to
Yep.
communicate with the client. You just have to.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that's like, in the end, what does it come down is communication. And
But,
one thing I didn't, sorry, go on.
I've also found myself sitting on good news because I'm like, I don't want to get their hopes up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I have an indicator that something might be happening. Odds are it's not to come through. I don't want to get them in a place where they're like, oh shit, this thing's going to happen that I didn't know was going to happen.
That's the definition of film and TV, like good news that you just might as well not share, because nothing will come of it.
I had a situation recently where like a major director was reading a project. I think literally didn't tell the client because I knew the odds were so slim, and it wasn't a thing that I wanted them to necessarily be thinking about in a really active way.
It's literally happening to me right now. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's even beyond that. I think that they have said they are signing on, but we're still like, we're just like, not until there's something sent to me in writing, and it's right. Like, and that's part of the game too.
So last thing I want to talk about while we're waiting for some questions to come in, and just remind you guys, if you have questions, like kick them in. Boundaries is a big one, right? So for me, one of the things I'm really looking for in that initial conversation with the client, sometimes the most important thing is, do I get the vibe that you have good boundaries? Do I get the sense that you know where a professional relationship ends and a personal one begins? That if I set a boundary in terms of like, hey, I'm not going to respond to emails unless they're urgent over the weekend, right? And knowing that that will be respected and knowing that that will be appreciated, or expecting a certain kind of attention or a certain kind of relationship when that's just not appropriate for the situation, right? Well, how do you manage that? What boundaries do you feel like are important for you, or how do you set those expectations, those kind of things?
I'm pretty bad. It's not like well, again, we talk about sort of emails or whatnot. Again, I tend to respond or whatnot, but I think setting boundaries is one of my harder issues, and I just sort of hope people catch up in time. Where I think people are much better at sort of like giving a sense of expectations, and it's one of my bigger weaknesses. I would say that I think what I've gotten good at is figuring out whether I want to work with a client early on. Like I've had some clients. That's one of the problems, is that some of the clients I still have don't respect some of the boundaries, and I've had just a really hard time. I'm bad at that because I don't like. In some ways, it's a sense of rejection. That's a sense of pushing away. It's a sense of disappointment, and I want to be able to be there for someone. And I actually honestly envy my colleagues who are like, nope, for right here and right now. And what I don't do, but I don't do like I think the biggest one is like text. Like some of my clients connect me with text. They sort of do it without asking, and I'm fine with it, but I don't encourage it at all, and I sort of keep that away. Same thing with GChat. There's a couple of them I have to, but most of the time it's really just email or phone calls for me, and that sort of keeps my separation a little bit. But I got to tell you honestly, Don, I could be better with that, and I should be better at that.
It's hard. It's really hard to maintain those lines, right? And it's really hard to set those expectations. For me, it's almost more an emotional one than like a practical one in that way, in terms of like texting me at a certain time. For me, so much of it is like, I'm not your therapist, right? I'm your literary agent, right? I'm a business partner. I'm here to hear about the challenges you're having. I'm here to hear about the struggles, but like, I'm not the person who can help you get out of funk, right? I'm not the person who can solve certain problems for you. And I think understanding the boundary between me as a professional who's here to help you sell books and be a partner to you, that can be a really fuzzy line sometimes, right? Because we are working on stuff that is really emotional for clients, and we do need to be really sensitive when a book is touching on their traumas or their histories in a certain way. But at the end of the day, I think this idea that we have sometimes of the agent being a therapist is really damaging both to us and clients, right? So a thing that I've had to really learn how to do over the past several years is start drawing that line in a way that's not hurtful and that isn't making them feel dismissed. Being really clear about you know what, at the end of the day, it is a problem and I cannot solve that problem for you. I'm here to listen to you about your woes in terms of writing or publishing or things like that. But there's an upper limit to what I can do for you. And that's true of the friends of my clients too, right? Like friends also have boundaries, right? There's a certain point at which your relationship is this, and being really clear about what that is, I think is really important. So
I agree. We don't have tons of time, so I won't add more onto it.
All right, let's move on to questions. I just wanted to hit that quickly before we moved out, because I think that's the thing I wished I thought about more clearly when I was getting started.
Well, it's a problem for me too, and I do act a bit like that. Okay, Sarah, what kind of bad news can result in a situation where the writer would need to change their name or category? It is sales, and I'm not like repping people who killed someone and we need to change their name. It's only sales, and most of the time
there is that mystery writer who did kill somebody.
Well, that's a great sales tactic. No, so the way it usually works with changing the name is basically usually on submission. Like most of the time, a publisher will then be bold enough to say, "Listen, I love the book, and I think we can overcome the sales because we're doing something new here and doing whatever." And ultimately, like the thing, what is the thing? If you write the exact same kind of thing, then it's more likely you need to change something on that end. If you write something different, it's less likely you need to change the name. So if you have bad sales in the adult literary fiction world and you want to write a kid's picture book, fine. Don't care. Go ahead, let's do it. But if you want to write something closer, then you need to try and separate yourself out, in my mind.
Okay, Shadow Down. How do you manage rejection feedback to your client that goes directly against edits advice you have given them? This is an awkward one.
That's a great question.
It's a great question. And, I once had a client where I really had her rewrite the whole damn book to fit a certain strategy, and we whiffed it, right? Like that book just didn't land. It was one of those things where every single judgment I had over the process turned out to be completely incorrect, because she had written a super literary, very sort of challenging fantasy novel. And I was like, let's sit on this one for a minute. Let's try and sell this other thing, which I think is more commercial. It's more YA. And return to the more complicated project once you have a rep. And the thing is, we whiffed it on the YA and then came back and ended up placing the very literary, very difficult adult novel with a great deal, right? And it was just one of those things where sometimes you don't know what's going to happen. And for me, I try to communicate upfront as much as possible to my clients that I'm not some oracle, right? Publishing is fucking random. And when things work, it's hard to know why they work. And when things fail, it's hard to know why they fail. I'm going off my best judgment. It's a conversation. I'm not saying you must do this. It's always making sure that they're involved and feel agency in those decisions, so that when something doesn't go right, we were in it together. We made that choice together. We're still working on it together. We're working towards a solution together. I think communicating that teamwork thing can really mitigate that a lot.
I agree. I mean, I do think that is also one of the places where separations happen with agents and authors, right? Is sort of like, there's a place in your career where you're going to come to ask yourself whether it's worth you sending something out that you don't agree with. And sometimes the answer is yes, because you just trust the author and you're willing to give it a try as their just representative. But I would always prefer to be like, I fucking love this book. Do you hear me, editor? This is important, as opposed to, as opposed to, it's not like you still do your best, right? But you just know, let's be honest, like, of course you're going to sell something better that you're like all in on. So therefore it's important in my mind to give editorial feedback that you believe in and then try and stick by it. And if they can't get there, then make sure that you guys have a parity of belief and, judgment, so that, again, teamwork, when you get to the end, you're there together with it. But that's a hard one. So I'm going to, we'll stop it.
It does happen, but it can be a tricky moment for
sure.
Do
you find it difficult to manage 2 or more clients who are friends, communicate regularly about the writing and the relationship with you as an agent? Yes, but it's not like, it's more like, it's necessary. Yeah, well, that's the thing. It feels like, and it's sort of a joke, but there's like often like commentaries like, Team Dongwon or Team Fishman or whatever. I love that because it's very nice. But that also means if they're saying that means they're happy with me. But I do what I tend to see is when that's happening, it's not the problem with the 2. It's more like there are first of all, there's some real positives. That means that group is speaking positively about you, and they're if they like what you're doing, and they could bring you more clients, or work to be friends and work together and stuff. And in the sci-fi space, especially, there's like a lot of that, science fiction space. But the negative about that is really basic jealousy. In my mind, is really like, these 2 people who are real friends, one of them I get a $500,000 book deal for, and one of them I get a $25,000 book deal, and that's going to cause some friction. And I've had clients leave because of that. I've had some real honest jealousy, but kind of that stuff. But that's really just about human relationships, and it's not exactly my job to manage that. The way that I manage that simply is, and this is something we hadn't talked about, I do my very best not to talk about other clients when I'm speaking with a client, unless they ask, hey, can you send a book to blank? Or, hey, you want to do an event with this book? And if they're friends, then, it happens a lot more often. But, I don't, I just don't think that it really, you don't want to be talking about this other business in the face of your clients.
I mean, this is where, I was talking about boundaries earlier. This is one of the main ones where that really comes in. I need to know that you have good boundaries and understand that my job is my job. And sometimes someone's going to be nominated for awards and you're not. And you can't have a problem with me because of that, right? It's not that I gave that person more attention, it's that book is working or not, right? Or if I am giving them more attention, that's a right now thing, right? I think understanding, those kind of things is really important. And, but also boundaries on my end, right? I'm never going to talk about what's going on with another client unless I know the 2 have talked, and, the client, and one person's like, oh yeah, so-and-so told me this thing, isn't that cool? It's like, yeah, that is cool, right? And then I could talk about it in a certain way. But knowing where my lines are in terms of what I can share and what I can't share is an enormous amount of mental work that I'm doing almost at all times. And it's really, really important. I cannot overstate how important you, and as an agent, are very clear on those things.
Yeah.
And, you were talking about like the Team Dongwon or Team Fishman, like those kind of things. Like, in terms of boundaries, again, one thing I really push back on hard is anytime that conversation starts moving towards like a metaphor of me being the dad of the group, because I'm not, right? It's just fundamentally a misapprehension of what our relationship is. And so being able to have those boundaries, being able to manage those communication between your clients, and making it clear to them that, like, even the notion of like agent siblings, I don't love, you know what I mean? Any of those metaphors around family feel really off to me. And, I think it's really important for us to enforce those boundaries, both between, us and the clients, and a little bit between them. It's not really our role to manage that, but just to be aware and really keep an eye on when those jealousies start forming, and trying to head that off at the pass if you can. Very hard to do so. But anyways.
I fully agree. And listen, even though we're sort of time, I do think it's worth answering this, like a brief answer to the last question, because it's such a good one. I'd love to hear more about how you manage client communications around a project that feels like it's going off the rails on the publisher side when you still have runway before publication. So let me be clear. This is the short way of this. That runway is probably less than you think it is. Like, you can start having things go off the rail 8 months before publication, and you just sort of start feeling that. And now you're like, whoa, that's crazy. Well, there's lots of stuff we can do. But what the fundamental truth is that if a publisher decides not to do something, then like we do our best to try and make that switch, that change, but it's like it's just an uphill battle. So the agent communication is basically the way that I deal with it is calling up the agent the client, and being like, okay, listen, I'm a little disappointed by this and this and this. What we need to do here is to get the publisher excited so they're back on track. Most of the time that you find out things are coming out of the rail, though, you're already missing some of these milestones that you need to get this encouragement. So like I was mentioning last week, I was really excited because the Booker Prize long list was something like one of the purest examples I've ever had 2 weeks before pub, where I was able to be like, yo, give me more money, let's do more stuff. And they were like, yeah, because we let this one go and it's doing great now, and it seems like it's working out, but it still hasn't gotten that full, car wash that you want. But most of the time, like, unless you pull,
Car wash?
I don't know, I gotta get a car wash today. No, but most of the time, like, the way, how do you do that? That's like you teaming up with your client, managing those expectations, and then also sort of being like, okay, we got to offer something, which we should be doing anyways, by the way. We got to be coming up with ideas, which we should be doing anyways, by the way. So that's the thing. If you're already firing on all cylinders, how do you get above that? And we can sort of find an extra bit of jet fuel in there, but that basically means focusing and getting those early and making something happen. Making the change, making the shift is really the problem. So I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot, Don Juan, but when I'm talking about this communication, the truth of the matter is, the real question for me is how real I am. And the reality is when things start going off the rails, they're probably going to stay off the rails, and we got to just mitigate the damage and try and figure out how you can, like, again, have some sort of success. Get the hits that you need to make the book succeed in a different way. And because most of the time you're not turning the publication all the way around, in my opinion. And that's the sad truth.
Yeah. And, like I said before, it's about being honest and direct and making it clear that we're a team and we're going to figure this out together, right? For me, that's how I manage that. It's tough, though. I mean, the reality situation is it's really, really hard. And it's really hard to get it right. It's really hard to feel good about it, for them to feel good about it at the end of the day. It's just going to be a tough moment. And I think embracing that and riding that out is the key. And, you got to be honest with yourself. You got to be honest with them. It's kind of what it comes down to for me. I want to hit this last question super quick. Real quick. Mark, you're asking do you find you talk more with newer clients when trying to establish boundaries and expectations, or clients you work with for longer? Honestly, it's constant work all throughout, right? It's a thing that I'm always thinking about. It's a thing that I think requires constant maintenance and updating and work. And like any relationship you have in your life, a friendship, a romantic partner, your family, whatever it is, like figuring out those boundaries, maintaining them, nurturing them is the work of the relationship throughout. So that's my last thought on that. Seth, do you have anything you want to add for that?
I think it's fair. I think it's fair to say that at the beginning you are spending some time trying to figure out how that relationship is working. But it's not like a honeymoon phase kind of thing. It's like you're trying to figure out the way that you need to be working best, and then you have that in there, and you're always checking. You're always there. Always there.
Totally.
So yeah.
All right. Great questions as always, guys. Thank you for tuning in to Agent Talk with Seth and Dong Wan. We hope you enjoyed this conversation. We hope you got something out of it. It's always nice to see the repeat people, like Seth was saying at the beginning. It's good to see the same names, and you guys always bring it. It's also nice to see some new names in here. There's a couple of you guys who have shown up and asked questions, and I'm really excited that more people are coming in. So, Seth, where can people find you on the internet? You can find me at Seth A.S. Fishman on all the channels and website. And you can find me. I'm on Twitter at Dongwan. I have a newsletter called Publishing is Hard. That's on Substack. You can find it at the URL below. We will be back next Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern and 10 a.m. Pacific. We're here every week. We're here. We have plans for the next couple months here to keep talking about stuff. And we're excited to keep going. Until then, be good, read more, and publish better. Bye, y'all. See ya.